G'day guys, welcome back. Moving on to our next session, we'll be hearing from Michael Gooden from Resource Consultant Services based in Wagga Wagga. Michael was a regional agricultural landcare facilitator with Riverina Local Land Services, where he promoted sustainable land management across the Riverina catchment, dealing mostly with farmers and community groups. He also runs Old Man Creek Grass-Fed Bulls, an enterprise he started back in 2017 with his wife Ellie. Michael will be sharing some of his preliminary findings from the work he has been undertaking along with two land managers based in Harefield and Henty, looking at multi-species cover cropping and the benefits to livestock, soil health, the farmer's back pocket, and even reducing your carbon footprint. Again, for you all out there listening, please post your questions for Michael in the chat function Pigeonhole, so that when we come to the Q&A session, we've got some questions ready to ask. Thanks, Michael, and over to you.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks for the opportunity to be able to present this. And multi-species cover cropping is a tongue twister, especially if you overlay it with being a regional ag land care facilitator. So what is multi-species cover cropping? A couple of things I'll talk about in this presentation are some of the definitions of multi-species cover cropping, the acknowledgements of the people who were working with us in this space. We'll give some examples of mixes that would be used and ways you'd go around making a multi-species mix. We'll give some real-life examples of people who have been doing it, what their experiences have been. And probably the thing that was most exciting in doing this work was there was a lot of questions raised about why things are working, what's the interactions between the soil and the biology, and challenging our existing paradigms in and around multi-species cover cropping. There's lots of questions being raised, and there's lots of opportunities, I think, that are coming out of this. Firstly, what is a multi-species cover crop? Well, basically, it's growing one or more species of plants in a single field. Now, that mightn't sound like a big concept, but it actually goes against a lot of our mainstream modern agronomy, where traditionally we've been promoted to grow monocultures. There's some benefits from ease of management and simplification of management in a monoculture crop, with being able to be very prescriptive with nutritional requirements and chemical requirements in crop. But conversely, there is obviously a big reduction in biodiversity in the field, and that, I think, is where this niche of multi-species can provide opportunities by being able to improve the diversity of plants in the field. I think probably more it's about what the goal that we're trying to achieve rather than actually a specific definition. Certainly in Europe, North America, the concept of using multi-species cover crops is probably different to what we're looking at here in Australia, and we just need to be a little bit mindful. Don't get too hung up on the actual definition, but probably focus on what we're trying to achieve. With anything like this, one of the things I want to be really mindful of is acknowledging the inquisitive nature of the farmers that we were working with, their desire to want to look at challenging what they're doing in their existing production systems and trying to look for ways that they can improve that. There's a lot of organisations and a lot of people that were involved in this, only for sort of 9 months last year. But at the time when we put this abstract in, I was a regional ag land care facilitator for Riverina Local Land Services, and I'd really like to thank them for supporting me to continue on this presentation, even though now I'm currently an employee for RCS. Jim Mecker from JM Livestock was instrumental in probably doing that nitty-gritty work of taking the pasture measurements and feed test results and putting a bit of data in and around some of the information we collected, and really grateful to Steve Scott at Scott's Angus and Henty for his opening up his doors and challenging what he was wanting to do. Steve sort of first came across the concept of the multi-species cropping at a workshop in early 2020, put on by Holbrook Landcare. There was a gentleman there, Grant Sims, who's on the Vic No-Till board at the time. He sort of gave a talk about how he'd been using multi-species crops in his production system based in northeast Victoria. And so Steve was inspired by that and went back into his business and decided to, instead of sowing his traditional monoculture grazing oats and or wheat, decided to put in some 2 or 3 species. So that was sort of what the impetus for this. And once we went down this path, there was other growers around who done a few different things. Henry Crook and also Cole Sice. A myriad of lots of other growers have been doing this, but these were the ones that we were sort of involved with. They say it says 1,000 words, and this slide here I think really represents what we're trying to achieve by looking at a multi-species crop. So we can see on the left-hand side the monoculture, the very similar below ground, very similar root structures of all the plants, very similar growth rate, nutrient requirements at the time, very similar leaf architecture, and also very similar biological associations. And we look on the right-hand side, we can see all the diversity that's occurring, different rooting depths, different root shapes, different types, different ability to be able to communicate with the biology below ground, different associations with both pest and predators above ground. So the different plant biodiversity really helps create different conditions for niches of plants and insects to be able to operate within the field. Now, what different types of plants should we be looking at? So this graph here has been taken from the USDA site, and it is it's breaking the different types of plants into the different areas. So we've got cool season grasses, legumes and broadleafs, and then warm season grasses, broadleafs and legumes. So traditionally we've sort of, in our area, we've been sowing our cool season grasses, oats, barley, wheat, etc. And then, the next year we would probably look at a cool season sort of canola or lentil or vetch, something along those lines. So the concept of multi-species is actually combining some of these plants together. And what we're wanting to really achieve is having a diversity of these groups. So sowing some cool season grasses with some broadleafs and some legumes. And then in the other time of the year, potentially looking at sowing some warm season grasses and broadleafs and legumes. And it's really important to get these different plant types together so that we get the synergies between different plants. Whenever we go looking at something like this, I think it's really mindful we want to really understand what we're trying to achieve. What is the mix that we're wanting, and what is the goal that we're wanting to do? Are we trying to increase nitrogen fixation or some phosphorus relief? We want to improve nutrient cycling. Are we wanting to attract pollinators or a predator beside a main crop? Are we wanting to suppress weeds, increase soil organic matter or soil carbon? Is there grazing opportunities that we want to do by sowing a multi-species crop? Can we integrate other enterprises on top of an existing cropping enterprise? So we need to be really mindful about what we're trying to achieve when we go down the path of sowing a multi-species crop. Now, for us, what is our goal? And that is to profitably leave our land in better condition. So this is the thing that we're testing against. Should we be looking at going and sowing a multi-species mix, or should we just be continuing on doing what we've been doing? Now, so in this scenario, we're looking at the situation of being in a mixed farm, that we've traditionally sown a winter grazing crop. Then that was the instance that Steve Scott had faced. What we're wanting to do is look at applying these 6 soil health principles to make a decision on how a multi-species mix would fit into this situation. So it's extremely important that in anything like this, we look at planning and monitoring and managing what the situation is. What season will the crop be grown? So in this situation, it would be a winter crop. So we'd be looking at sowing seeds of a winter habit. And then how are we going to be utilising that crop? What are are we going to be grazing it? Is it going to be for grain production? What are we trying to manage for in this situation? And probably most importantly too, what is our budget? What would our usual seed cost be? What are we prepared to be spending on this if we go and look at changing our seed mix? And what are the grazing that we're going to get off it? And what's the dry matter? Is it going to be profitable? So yeah, obviously we want to be maximising living plant production. So we want to be trying to extend that traditional growing season. We need to be focusing on biology, and that will help to repair the soil. the beauty of we've seen sort of so far is with the multi-species crops is that we've been able to increase the diversity naturally with more plants being in there, and that's had a positive effect on the soil biology. Obviously, we're going to be introducing biodiversity by having more than just one annual plant in the ground. So by having various mixes, that will naturally increase biodiversity. And subsequently, what some of the observations have been is this has improved the soil health to allow for a greater plant succession into the future. Obviously, maximising thickness and availability of ground cover is really beneficial in a multi-species cover crop. There's been examples of where people have sown multi-species crops instead of a fallow situation, and I actually think that's one of the areas that could be really beneficial. So instead of traditionally just fallowing the country, sowing in a crop to just maintain that ground cover and try and keep that living plant for as long as possible. And one of the observations that Steve certainly had was the livestock performance whilst the animals were on the multi-species crop was quite interesting. Some of the data that we from Steve's place. So, traditionally Steve had sown, a monoculture of either oats or wheat. And then last year, he, in a couple of his various paddocks, he sort of oats, ryegrass and radish, or oats and vetch, and oats and radish and vetch, and then a few different combinations, and then another wheat with radish and turnip. So he didn't go ballistic, he got 10 or 12 way mix, but he just changed a few different things in there. And you can see some of the seed costs that were associated with it. And I think this is one of the things we've got to be really mindful of, is it quickly can start adding up to your seed costs per hectare if you start throwing in all these different seeds. So we've got to be bringing this back to what's going to be the economical benefit from this, and how we're going to measure that, and how we're going to make sure that we're not just spending a heap more money on seed. Is it going to be profitable? One of the interesting observations was some of the animal performance that was recorded on Steve's place, and so this data is not paired. It was just we took the measurements of 20 hectares. He had some weight gain data. It was certainly better than what he'd experienced in the past, but in this situation, we didn't have the paired data to sort of say, well, this animal's performed better on this crop as compared to the other. But he's still, 1.5 or 1.2 kilos a day for a group of animals over 90 days is a really great outcome in that crop. Now, it wouldn't be a talk on multi-species without a bit of a shot of the tillage radish. And so some of the questions that sort of Steve was asking us about were, why were the weight gains above more than normal? What was going on there? While the crops were growing, we took several feed test samples, and in a couple of the samples we had extremely high nitrate levels, but there weren't any metabolic issues in the cattle. Like, the cattle were performing well, there was no sickness or anything like that, and that was puzzling what was going on in that situation. Throughout different growth stages of the crop, there was some preferential grazing. There was a time when a lot of the cattle went for the radishes and the turnips, and then there was other times when they were really chasing the cereals. We didn't really understand what was going on there. And one of the great things was there was a reduced input, urea input at the time, but still very good dry matter production. And that was a little bit puzzling, obviously beneficial in a lot of ways, but it was interesting to just see how that was panning out. Just some data that Jim Mecca collected about the actual total dry matter that was produced in a couple of paddocks. And the grazing data that I just showed was from the paddock on the left-hand side of 1W Hill, and it grew over 12 tonnes of dry matter and sort of eight or so tonnes available in this, from when it was sown in April into this. These measurements were taken in October, and you're comparing it across the other crops that were grown. The traditional monoculture oats, a little bit less dry matter production. It certainly comparing it to the perennial pasture base at the time, although that might not have necessarily been the best example on the property. Still a massive amount of dry matter produced over a short period of time. Investigating all this, then what we sort of started to compile some of this information together, and I came across some other research that's been done by Cole Seiss up at Goolagong. In Cole's situation, he had a small area, was side by side, 6 hectares each, and one was sown in traditional barley, 50 kilos of barley, and then another was then sown as a multi-species. So he had but barley, field peas, fava beans, brassica, tillage radish, turnips, and the 50 kilos of MOP. So significantly more cost, $180 a hectare in seed and fertiliser. What was really interesting though was when it came to the animal performance. So on the monoculture barley, over 55 days, average daily gain of 153 grams, and that equated to a profit of $870 a hectare over that period of time. As compared to on the multi-species, the weight gain was basically double, 300 grams a day, and that equated to a profit of $1,900. So that's a significant difference over a short period of time, with taking into account the extra cost of the seed. This weight gain was also replicated into a certain extent with Craig Wilson's Australian Merino data trial on Henry Cook space, although that weight gain then did tail off over a period of time. One of the interesting observations that Cole made was the difference in the soil over just a very short period of time. We can see here the sort of tight, compacted nature of the single species barley crop as compared to the aggregation. You can see sort of the rhizome sheath on some of the roots and some of the biology in the multi-species crop on the right-hand side. Another interesting observation was what happened from the soil test results, the changes in some of the nutrients in the soil just in a very short period of time. So an increase in carbon, which is to be expected, obviously phosphorus, calcium and magnesium. Very interesting observations. And this is probably where this conversation is going, is what's happening here, why is this occurring, what is causing it, and what could we try and look at doing to understand more about it. I think, there's many questions that have been raised with this data. Why is livestock performance higher on these multi-species crops? What's occurring there? How come there's less metabolic issues? What's happening with our soil biology and nutrient uptake? There's a lot of things going on there that we don't really understand. Would there be a benefit from successive multi-species crops time after time after time if we were to look at using multi-species? What would then happen from a soil structure perspective? How would grazing management change? I think a lot of guys who've been using some of the multi-species crops, they might have been sowing the crops quite well, but then potentially not utilising them as well with good grazing management. And there's lots more research opportunities that to be able to adapt some of this stuff into our local region. So what's sort of the science that we know to date around this area? A lot of it probably comes from North America and Europe, and that's why I think the opportunity is to bring that into what we can do locally. In March 2020, we had a workshop in Wagga here, attended by sort of 50-odd local producers. Joel Williams, he's an independent plant health and soil health educator. He gave a talk about the role that cover crops and multi-species crops can play. A lot of the information that he was presenting about this was all research that's been done in North America. There's lots and lots that have been done on it. There's paper after paper after paper showing about the different responses of this, the benefits of having the multi-species in the field. There's a lot of interactions going on. It's a big opportunity for research. So I think from what I'm wanting to achieve is to spark the minds and think, well, what can we learn? What's applicable to our region? How can we improve what's going on in this situation? I see this as a real opportunity for potential collaboration between sort of GRDC and MLA to look at doing not only the crop production and soil health benefits of multi-species, but also the animal performance side of it. Really good opportunity to be able to collaborate together. So in summary, I'm hoping that I've been able to demonstrate to you what a multi-species cover crop is, why you would consider using it in your production system and what benefits it could potentially provide. And then hopefully this has provided some thought to opportunities that could come about into the future from a research perspective. That's it at this point in time for what I'm up to with the multi-species cover cropping. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to present this. Thanks a lot.
Beautiful. Thanks for that, Michael. Mate, it seems like almost like a given with the when you stack out the maths, definitely when it hits the bottom line, you see the difference in using multi-species versus just monocultural cropping there. Mate, you've actually managed to stimulate a fair bit of questions out here, so I'll try and tackle through as many as I possibly can. One of the questions that come in is any examples of multi-species cover crops being successful between cash crops in environments that experience dry summers?
Yeah, and I think that is a really big challenge. I see the role for them in the short term, especially coming out of traditional monoculture cropping system, to be in crop, potentially sowing, tillage, radish, turnip, vetch type of mix in a cereal crop, and then even in the short term, just terminating them out, like in the south, terminating them out in sort of August, September with a broadleaf. You're still getting some benefits of that, some nutrient cycling, nitrogen fixation. To go along and then just go straight over that summer fallow, I think is going to be a big challenge. I think I don't have the data behind me to sort of prove this. This is talking from experience of people who have done this type of work. I think the first step in that situation is to look at maintaining that stubble cover over the summer, rather than sort of the old traditional bare fallow. And then over time, what you're wanting to do is probably extend that growing season out. So in early March and harvest in December, as long as you stretch that winter growing season out, and then potentially look at jumping over to a shorter summer fallow period. A lot of that's going to be rainfall dependent and locality specific. I'm not, multi-species crops aren't a silver bullet to go into a 400 mil rainfall and all of a sudden, because you've done that, you can go and sow a summer fallow. You've got to be realistic about where they're going to fit in.
Sorry, guys. And again, guys, we're going to archive all these questions so that we can get to these questions after this, because one of the people who's actually posted is there opportunities for to link up to do some research.
Yeah,
so
cool.
We'll find out who that would come from. I was going to give a quick comment. A minute ago. Sorry, the questions move around a little bit. Linda Kimber has asked, sorry, this is the comment. I've seen some excellent results from multi-species cropping on the improvement of topsoil health. Excellent and fascinating, reducing inputs and creating healthier soils to produce better crops.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly, this is the type of comments that I've heard as well. And, we've got to be careful about this. We really want to get some more hard evidence around it. Like there's oodles and oodles of anecdotal evidence around, but I think we've got to be really conscious, especially if we go down this carbon space. We really need the hard data to show what's occurring, why it's occurring, get some more information around it, and probably potentially, do some replicated work on it. I think one of the difficulties with wanting to do this is because there's so many variables, just to do a replicated plot, do one action here and one action there, you'd need 20 different plots to get all the different variances that are going to occur. So, and also what would occur over time. So I think from people who have done it in paddock, the cumulative benefit of multiple multi-species crops is, it's the old sort of 2 + 2 is 5 or 2 + 2 is 10 rather than 4. So that's where I think the opportunity lies.
Yeah, that's research and extensions coming your way, mate. I got a question here from Simon Rowe. Do you have any tips on how to mix the seeds to achieve an even sow, different sizes, shapes, etc.? Thinking about how some need depth and others need surface. Multiple passes?
Well, yeah, that's been one of the interesting things. The grower observations have been that that sort of seed mix that we had up of Coles was relatively standard, and so you sort of a base cereal rate. You're looking at sort of seed size is probably one of the factors. Seeding depth is interesting. I know in our own personal experience, we just sowed it at about an inch, and they all came up. So it's probably a little bit of a paradigm. If the seed's a healthy seed that wants to germinate, it probably will. You're not going to be, you can't get every seed perfectly placed, so you've just got to have a bit of compromise in that situation. It's amazing. You think, all these, all the lighter seeds are going to sift to the top of the box and all the heavy seeds are going to come out first. It doesn't necessarily seem to happen that way. That's just a bit of the luck of the draw there. And I think that gets back to exactly what you're trying to achieve. This is not an exact science. We don't have to be sowing exactly 35 kilos a hectare of this mix. We're just trying to improve the diversity in the paddock. From a livestock perspective, they're not going to get too concerned if there was 12 hectares of tillage radish sown in this part of the paddock and 15 sown in that part of the paddock. The soil biology is probably not going to care either. So I think we get a bit hung up on the semantics of it, and rather than just, near enough's probably is good enough.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And I don't think the livestock's going to be too picky in what they're eating as far as, if there's a bit of a diverse mix there, good for their diet. We've probably got time for one more question. Renee McGlashan, apologies if I didn't pronounce your name properly. It says research from South and North America shows greater than 8 species of cover crop give optimal results. Has similar findings been found in Australia? And what is the difference between here and the US?
Yeah, well, that's another whole can of worms there. And I think what he might be referring to is the term of sort of quorum sensing. And I didn't really go down this path in this talk, but so basically when you get to that stage, it's the synergy between getting different groups of biology talking to each other. Different plants have different biological associations. And by increasing those species, I've heard sort of Christine Jones and Nicole Masters allude to this. In all honesty, for me, I think, Joel Williams put it really well. Like 2 species is better than 1. And, I think there's a multiplier effect. So obviously, I think there is a tipping point at that 8 because you get all those different associations. The thing that's really important with that is you need to have the different plant groups. So you need to have your legumes, your brassicas, your cereals, your chenopod's. You need to have those different family groups so the biology starts talking. But, the research on that, I don't know of research that's happened locally. Obviously, the North American system is very different to what we're operating in. Their soils are a lot younger, especially in that North America. They really get that cooling period and then a short, sharp, warm growing season, and those conditions can be very different to what we face. So that's why I think the opportunity there lies. A lot of the principles can be the same, but the actual in-paddock opportunities that and the conditions that the plants are growing in can be significantly different.
Yeah, great, Mark. Thanks so much for that. Look, guys, I'm starting to eat into your lunch break time, so I'm gonna wrap up there. Thanks again to our 2 presenters for our first 2 presentations for the Sustainable Agricultural Stream. Look, we're going to lunch for a 45-minute break. During that lunch break, guys, if you get a chance, can you go to the virtual booths for our sponsors? This conference couldn't be made possible without the support of the sponsors. And again, thanks to Gallagher for sponsoring the stream. I'll see you guys back here in 45 minutes. Thanks.